Dāmas un kungi,
Ladies and gentlemen, also those who view us on the web portals, we are back from our last coffee break and we are continuing our work on quality assurance in construction. And this is the topic of our last panel session, where we are going to have speakers from 4 member states and control institutions from the consortium and 2 representatives from Latvia. Mostly we are going to speak about 2 questions. One is going to be related to whether we should have more or less state control in construction. And the other question that we're going to look at is the principle of mandatory or voluntary standard use as additional criteria in public procurement. So we are going to be quite democratic and use digital tools also in this section, and we are going to do it in parallel. So the first issue is about whether government action plans actually help or rather hinder the development of the industry, and we should probably base ourselves just on market mechanisms. And we invite you to look at this question and work on it. So you have to go into the portal www.mentai.com and you can show your own opinion whether the government action plan promotes or hinders development of the industry.
Panel session here, and parallelly to that, while we're going to speak on the basic question, do you think the action plan for construction approved by the government helps or contrary hinders the development of the industry? You can also, through your mobile phones, those who are in the room, vote your thoughts. And in the mobile phones, you have also in English posted this question. But we're going to discuss here in front. So please, with applause, welcome our panel speakers. Martin Russell Crocher, Secretary General of Consortium of European Building Control. Rainer Mikulits, applause, still applause, ladies and gentlemen, in the late afternoon. Managing Director of Austrian Institute. Lorraine Penot, President of Consortium of European Building Control with the French perspective. And Paul Iverol, Vice President of Consortium UK perspective, also with applause as a newcomer to our stage today. And from Latvia we have, of course, Edmunds Valantis, or as in English we say Valantis. Please, Edmund, please join us here, Ministry of Economics. In fact, he has the biggest power today. He's bringing all the state sector on his shoulders. He's responsible, in fact, for everything this afternoon. And Martin Stolz, Chairman of Board State Real Estate. With applause. With applause. Welcome, Martin Stö. And the simple system, gentlemen here, well, ladies, the gender balance issue is totally broken this afternoon. The question is, do you think the action plan for construction approved by government helps or hinders development of industry, or coming more to the basics, more government or less government in the game to get better result from your perspective, from your state perspective? And for each of you, if we can, a very quick mode, 3 minutes, 2-3 minutes to respond on this question and issue. And we're going to start with Paul this time, because you have the privilege to be on the stage. The rest of the people already have said something. The UK perspective and your own expert perspective on this. More government, less government, UK, which way? We already forgave you for Brexit, so it's absolutely okay about that. Please.
Thank you very much. Nice to have the reference to Brexit, as always in these days. Just a brief word about myself. As well as being Vice President of CVC, between 1991 and 2005, I was the head of the unit in the UK government responsible for the building regulations in England and Wales. And since then, I've been representing all of the 320 local authorities in England and Wales who have building control responsibilities. So I think you're very brave to produce this action plan, bringing it all together. I think you're to be congratulated on that. I think in England we were a little nervous about having one plan covering both the technical requirements of the building regulations and also things like minimum wage. There we are. I would comment that I do believe that it is the role of government to set the national policy for construction and to set the regulatory framework through building regulations. Thomas Muller argued earlier this afternoon that the developing countries need strong building codes. I would argue that in this country and in all the European countries we equally need strong building codes. So yes, I support the idea of a national framework led by government.
Thank you very much, Paul. We are just passing microphone and right from you. Yes, please.
Yeah. Well, the question. If I understand well, I think that we must assume that governments are probably a kind of the voice of all the population for the needs of now and the needs to come. And I think that according to that, you probably building sector and industry must be really concerned with that kind of feedback, because it's really unusual to see a government saying something which doesn't concern the people for now and future. So it is a kind of a view that we must take into account. What I think is probably more important is not who got the initiative at the end, because it is the way you will go and go further on the direction. And I think the memorandum I read, well, I'm not Latvian, I can't say if I agree with that, but according to the way it has been made, I think it's an opportunity. It's really a good opportunity for all the people, the stakeholder of construction sector, to say what they have to say about the way we are going to the target. And I think it's so important because I can push forward some regulation and everything I want. The key element is that we must all together be able to apply it, because there is a customer at the end who is going to buy this, and he's not buying regulation, but he's buying a kind of quality, and quality might be quite simple. It might be a matter of safety, of security, and you can grow according to the needs of the population, and there is an evolution of that. That's what I think.
Thank you, Laurent, very much. Yes, Rainer, your shot.
Yeah, so I understand just the first question for the time.
Yeah, just the first question. More government, less government,
yeah.
The governmental plans, good,
yeah.
Bad, more to market, more to the government.
I concentrate on the last facet of this governmental action plan. More government, less government is a much broader issue, so that would need more discussion. But a governmental action plan, I think I would agree to what is the result, the momentary result of the referendum, if I can say. It rather will help. It will rather help. And there is, of course, it's not sure whether it is going to help, but it depends very much on which actions are included in this action plan. And I suppose that this action could also include some monetary contributions, and that is something which might be a key element for the success of such an action plan. That there are incentives which motivate more investment and perhaps also investment into better quality. In this respect, I think that is a task of the government. The government is responsible for health and safety issues. That will be a topic later in the second question. But the government is certainly, in my understanding, also responsible in, let's say, in ensuring a playing field which is friendly for industry and investments of industry. And therefore there is also such a soft action needed, which is not a regulatory activity, but an action plan in the sense of improving the playing field for the stakeholders in the construction sector.
Thank you very much, Rainer. You got something very important into the game, that the plan is just a form, the content is the king, definitely. Well, yes, please, your opinion.
Yes, I think that it's probably essential that your action plan is the government follows through on this. To just give you some examples from the UK, which is where I'm based, is the government that's driving BIM into construction, thereby mandating its use for public buildings. So that's one example. And then I have also, like Thomas, been around a little bit outside of the UK and did some work in both Bangladesh and Cambodia. And what I can say from my experience of looking at building control out there is if the government doesn't take action, nothing will happen at all. And that's how we ended up with some of the disasters in Bangladesh. If you recall the Rana Plaza collapse. So investigating that and why there were failures in building control there was that you need to have enforcement. It's not just having regulations, you need enforcement as well.
Thank you. Really good lines, I believe. Martin, we are giving word to you, and well, Edmund's gonna finish as a governmental representative saying yes or no to his own plan. Please, Martin.
My task may be one of the hardest, as I represent both the public and private sector here. And you may ask why? Because the company state real estate belongs to the Ministry of Finance. It holds 100% of the shares, but at the same time, we are supposed to be a company which produces added value, who reconstructs and maintains buildings, and then looking cautiously at Peteris and other participant of this discussion. I'm thinking that if the state doesn't do enough, or if we do not do enough as a state companies, and the state buildings will collapse. But we are responsible for the buildings, and without the government, nothing can be done. Higher quality products must be produced, and in my opinion, the product that the government produces is laws and documents, and also the human resources must be improved. And our system of education does it regardless of the problems that it may have, but we as clients must be better educated. I will mention a practical example. If we have not completed the design task adequately, then we will face major problems during the construction process. We will have to redesign and amend it, and we will not meet the deadlines. For instance, the renovation of Riga Castle. In the second phase, the documents to be submitted in the building authority consisted of 64 volumes, which had to be carried to the office of the building authority by a truck. And then after the authority said that we have to make some corrections, we had to load all the volumes back into the truck and carry them back and forth and to make the corrections on paper, because this is what the authority demands, and we must improve our communication here. Thank you for your opinions, but imagine the contribution to the logistics when you are hiring a fleet of lorries to transport your volumes of documents. Now, Edmund, you must conclude the first round of discussions with self-reflection. It is Freud's idea of psychoanalysis, which has come back here as it is late afternoon. A lot of ideas have been voiced. So what about the action plan produced by the government, and where do you see pluses and minuses? I wouldn't call it government plan, I would call it action plan. And considering the action plan, we have signed the memorandum. We are elaborating a strategy of building development. And if the financing is not allocated for specific activities, then the opinion of the sector and the opinion of the client is of critical importance to this document and its effectiveness. And I will explain why. The competitiveness of the sector is not something that the government can dictate or prompt to the sector. Many activities have to come from the sector itself. The sector has to approve them. And if the government does its job and the sector does its job, then together we can reach the best results. There are a few themes, a few aspects which we cannot bend and we cannot be flexible about as a ministry. Those are topics of safety and making sure that the client is protected in the, as well as the contractor. And the commissioner is protected in the construction process. But
of answers considering the question, and we can see what public thinks. 3,000 people voted, and we see that 21 of them, which is majority, specific mathematics, sees that rather helps. And we have two very depressive people in the room who said that rather hinders, and some of them thinks that the second position that helps, which is a good thing about all of this, that really pessimistic, depressive and anti, there are no one in the room. But it doesn't mean that they are not somewhere outside, because if they are depressive, they are always out there. And now we are continuing with the next question according to the same formula. And does the quality standards, and that's deeping more into details, does the quality standards in the construction should be defined as a mandatory or voluntary, used as additional qualification criteria, for example, in public procurements? And, well, already saying that in the Latvian, nākamais jautājums, ko mēs risinām, ir vai kvalitātes standarti būvniecībā jānosaka kā obligāti vai?
The same question is read in Latvian. So whether the quality standards have to be used as an additional condition in the public procurement tenders. Perhaps the reaction of the audience is grounded, so we will hear the reactions of the audience as well subsequently. But
the previous time. Okay.
I think minimum standards have to be mandatory. That's where we have in the building regulations in England and Wales. We set minimum standards to which everybody must conform. As one of my colleagues has said, though, it's no good just having regulations. You have to ensure you have a robust series of enforcement to making sure that builders, designers do comply, and that helps to control the black economy, as we would call it in England. If people who are not complying are then found out, that's one way of squeezing them out of the industry. That's not to say that building regulations should be the only standards. They are minimum standards. For example, in the UK, we've had a range of energy efficiency standards, and some organisations will require higher levels of energy efficiency through procurement criteria or something of that sort. But I do believe that core standards have to be mandatory.
Thank you very much, Paul. Passing the microphone, please.
Yeah. Well, I would say that about quality standards. Well, I should say more or less quality levels. Of course, I think that there is minimum kind of implicit demand of the market itself and on population, and I think it's on safety. Probably people won't imagine 1 minute that safety is not taken into account, and I'm sure that it should be necessary if I answer properly, but it's an obligation in fact, because it is so implicit. So, but probably other quality standards we have to really be quite easy with the needs and the demands, and if you are going too far on a demand and there is nobody who is concerned with, you may probably go to the recommendation system, which is not bad for a start. I think the difficulty for that is how to follow the needs of the population. It's not so easy because it changes according to the generation and probably the needs of the next generation of consumers should be much more different. But I think the only thing that you can feel all the time is it should be mandatory or obligatory for safety matters, and for the others probably minimum standard on which population does agree that it is okay to have that kind of standard, and optional or recommended for the others, just to help to go through regeneration, because it is kind of gap and difference which is not so smooth and which might be quite very fast situation. And I think it's good also for construction sector to be able to follow that in a very non-passionate system, and very clearly and in a cool manner.
Thank you, Laurent. Rainer.
Thank you very much. Actually, I would like to differentiate a little bit. Quality standards, what is actually meant by quality standards? You could interpret it as quality, minimum requirement, health and safety. That needs to be compulsory. But that is probably to a big part not in standards in the proper sense of the word, but in regulations, building codes, for example. They should of course be compulsory. There is no other way. But quality standards could also be understood as standards for higher levels of quality, which would no longer be minimum requirements, and then of course it should no longer be compulsory. But there is also a third perspective, and that is how this quality, whether it is the minimum quality or whether it is a higher quality, how this should be ensured. And there we are with the control, building control topic. Here again, I would say there should be a minimum building control procedure which ensures that the compulsory quality requirements, the minimum requirements, are indeed kept and achieved, whereas there might be room for voluntary quality marks, quality systems, whereby, for example, an advanced standard of accessibility is being certified or something like this. So there I really would like to differentiate. But if you meant by quality standards just the regulatory, let's say the minimum health and safety issues, then it should be compulsory.
Thank you, Rainer. And Martin, please.
Thank you. Well, I have to agree with my colleagues, but I would add, I noticed that you talk about public procurement. I would say that public procurement has to set the example, really. So, because if you're not setting the example, then nobody else is going to try and meet the standards. So.
Thank you. It was so fast that I even didn't fix the moment when you finished. That was very nice. Well, yes, there's a nice Latvian tradition. If you that we have a sentence that if you sit in between two Martins, or well, in between any people with the same name, then you can wish something for. So you all in between can wish for good construction policy, in Latvia. Very nice, Martin Stolz, please.
About obligatory and non-obligatory standards, I will give you an example from life. We just moved into a flat, an apartment. The house has been built by Latvian standards, but the water doesn't go away from the bath. The plumbing is all wrong. And when I spoke to the manager, he said, no, the house has been built by Latvian standards. So safety is okay, that was mentioned, and Rainer also mentioned that safety is, of course, number one. But if the water doesn't flow away from my bath, then it is maybe also an important question. Let us not involve government where it is maybe not involved. I represent the state real estate. What worries me? I think safety is certainly number one. We have spoken about that before. But there are also other things that make our life difficult. A practical example, do we have standardized contracts in design, building control, construction processes? Certainly, if we can push them here and forth, if the standards are so very flexible, then how can we actually influence things? If we speak about liabilities and how secure they are, then we have to ask what are the guarantees granted by the bank or the insurers. There are some cases when the bank pays immediately, then insurers don't really do that. We know what happened after the fire in the castle that we are renovating, and we have some contractual breaches of contract where, again, we have these problems with guarantees. So we need some guarantees. The question is how detailed all these conditions should be. So you can save a lot of water in this way because you can reuse it once again throughout a week, maybe. Edmund. So we need to speak in the microphone because otherwise the interpreters cannot hear. Now, water standards are the highest standards, I think, but everything that is related to safety is, of course, mandatory. And these safety standards should be granted during public procurement, and this is not a question of mandatory or non-mandatory requirements, but we also need to think about best practice and good practice examples. We know that all these requirements in the public procurement contracts are getting higher with every year, and we would invite you to still think about sustainability and performance of buildings. Maybe we shouldn't raise them to the over economic affordability, but we are always very happy if money is invested in zero energy houses, in smart housing. And I would say my ideas are not any different. We need to have some minimum requirements, and then we need different tools to raise these requirements to a higher stage, but these have to be voluntary. And we see that the majority states that we need to have minimum obligatory standards in the building industry, and this is also what the panel has stated.
Chit-chat like this for all weekend, in fact. We're not going to dive in on the deeper matters from question perspective. We're going to take some questions from the audience, because now is the right time and the right place. Dāmas un kungi, tātad mūsu lieliskajiem runātājiem ir...
Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to ask your questions now. This question, it is clear that quality standards have to be accessible, but we don't have it. So in Latvia, the contractor chooses, the client chooses the quality standard that he wants to see in the building. But it cannot, and it cannot be seen as a qualifying criteria. Maybe some other questions or comments. This was actually a comment. Second row. I'm the first one. Okay. I think that the first question was not really very correct, because if we speak about policies or documents that we really don't know, and we also heard here that content is important, and only then we can vote for something. So it wasn't really very acceptable for voting. Now, speaking about safety standards, I wouldn't somehow see energy efficiency together with safety. Water is also not safety, maybe. Maybe you have an instruction saying how much water you can use at a time, because now as buildings are sort of completed and given over to the client, they're going together with documentation and instructions how to use the building. If we speak about standards in building at all, then since we don't have any minimum level, and I'm from the roofing area, I was very much surprised that we don't have building materials complying to European standards in our retail outlets, because the only thing that dominates everywhere is only price. And then the buyer has no alternative. So here we have the issue of material or standards for material, and certain materials shouldn't really be allowed to be sold. And you can't actually sell building materials in a building material shop if they don't comply to certain standards. And the second question is employee qualification. You mentioned safety, but all these are just populistic phrases, labels, like slogans. It will be better if we do something in a certain way. Just one example. Now we have a law that safety systems will be placed on roofs, and then we might have no limiting constructions. Do you know what they are installing? Are you ready to hook yourself up to these things on the roof that we have now? I don't think so. So we have to look at every screw and whether it can be used at all. And then we have to look at the person who is responsible for putting in that screw. And then we can go further on to the engineer and the architect. So I would like to say that we have to start from the bottom, because this is very essential. The plumbing that you have in your bathroom was for sure installed by a plumber and not by a person who controls plumbers or building things. I would like to comment on what you said. Voting is one thing, but what happens after that is something quite different. And the American elections corroborates that.
I represent Norwegian municipalities on the CBC meetings, and we have maybe a little bit different codes in Norway, but every day we meet the interesting crosses to the user protection, because the user have other interests than the local authority. So the local authority does not take care of private interests or private agreements about you have bid. They just look about the codes, and that can be a collision sometimes. So my advice to the municipalities: keep the finger out.
Very good advice. Thank you very much. Norwegian perspective. Welcome to Latvia. And lūdzu jums tad noslēdzošais.
And the last question for you.
Learned panel and the prevalence of the English language amongst the panel, I would like to offer my comment and/or question in English. Quality is a very interesting question. Reiner's definition has been expanded to read life, health, and safety, because one of the reasons for the standards, in fact, is to save lives, at least to prevent deaths. So that factor should not be ignored. Or do I have to remind you with the number 54? The other part of the quality question is this. You can develop quality standards, but what will be the basis for the quality standards? Aren't quality requirements inherent in every single requirement for construction? Because how are you going to get quality if the work is not performed in that fashion? And I would like to remind the people present, and I can't blame you if you don't really know that, but after World War II, there was an American gentleman, Deming, who developed actually an approach to building inequality. He was chased out of the United States, by the way, and wound up in Japan, where the Japanese adopted his methodology. It may be less applicable to construction. It is very much applicable, for example, to manufacture, which would ensure the quality of construction materials. And what it is to some extent a scientific approach where you actually build in quality. You do not inspect inequality. And that is my comment. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your comment. Well, from all mentioned, which were...
No visa minētā.
Well, just very quickly, mēs katru reizi novienojamies, kā...
Each time we have to agree that once you get the microphone, you have 30 seconds. So the rules of the game are not changed. You have 30 seconds, but please speak in the microphone so Latvia can hear us. Of course, we are heard all over the world, but the whole world may not know that we are broadcast here. I will help to save your seconds. There are 4 requirements for the buildings. Now there are 7, yes. Now there are 7, but each of the requirements has norms that match it. And each norm has a measurement unit. If you know the market price for the material, for the construction, or for the entire building, if you know the market price and efficiency of the entire building, you divide the market price again with the function of efficiency, and that will be applicable. The same applies to safety. The second standard is the quality standard or quality standards. There are the requirements of the client and the designer who meets or doesn't meet the requirements and how much they cost. This is basic elementary math, elementary school math. I can send you that. Just a moment. This way, you will be able to find the price of the quality, which is not stated in the EU directive. It is just named but not qualified. Then you will arrive at the price of quality, and without conflicts, without litigation, you can compete with that. A builder and a designer can compete with his price offer. Thank you for attention. Thank you very much for your comment. And we are closing our circle of questions. And from all the questions voiced, I believe that there was a question about accessibility, which was the first one. Perhaps, Edmunds, you could summarize, as our panelists have to leave for the airport, as far as I know. So, Edmunds, perhaps you could reply with a single phrase in Latin, which would address all 6 comments and secret wishes of the audience. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity. My comment is as follows. To a large extent, the quality of building will not be defined by the amount of normative or legislative acts or their volumes or the details that they address, and not the total number of building inspectors that we have in the country. The critical element will be something else. It will be critical that all the stakeholders in the building sector will believe that the building quality is relevant and that they will be ready to answer for their works financially. And once we introduce this system, then the system itself will clear itself of the possibility that someone can offer substandard work. If people are financially penalized for failing to comply with the standards, when we achieve this, then a lot of issues will be solved simultaneously. We cannot certainly give up the building inspection or quality standards, but we must keep this in mind. Thank you. Let us applaud our panelists.
We had Martin Russell Croucher, applause, 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 applause. Rainer Mikulits, applause, applause. Laurent Penot, Paul Everall, and Edmunds Valandis, and Martin Stolz. Thank you very much. You are absolutely wonderful this afternoon, and now you are crowding back in the room, and some of you are running to the shuttle bus because you have to fly.